Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Javar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah, Chapter 5, Halacha 1, and we're going to continue with these questions about the scope of the court's power to declare something hefker and also to exempt it from tithes. So the Gemara, yesterday we left off saying, from where do we know that the produce declared hefker by the courts is exempt from the requirement of tithes? And we're going to get into the answer now. The Gemara answers, and it says, Rabbi Yonatan, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Acha, said, learn it from the Baraisa that says, we do not add a 13th month to the year and declare a leap year, neither in the Shvius year nor in the year following Shvius. But if the court did declare either of these years a leap year, their declaration is effective, and the year is established as a leap year. And the Gemara continues, and it says, now with respect to the produce that grows in the 1 month that the court adds when it declares Shvius a leap year, is it not hefker and exempt from tithes? So, like all other produce of the Shvius year, it does get to be exempt from tithes. So, in this instance, it's the court, by the virtue of the declaration of the leap year, that affects the state of the hefker and the resulting exemption from the tithes. So, we can see that the produce declared hefker by the court is going to be exempt from tithes, according to this baraisa. Now, there's a lot going on here. How can it be that they can do this? So we know that in the Bavli and Sanhedrin 12a, it deals with the authority of the Sanhedrin to declare the leap year. They have that power. And during the times of the temple and for several centuries thereafter, the calendar was not fixed like it is now. Rather, the Rosh Chodesh was declared by the Sanhedrin whenever the new moon was sighted, and the leap years were established by the Sanhedrin whenever they calculated that. This was necessary in order to keep the lunar year in sync with the solar year. Now, a lunar month lasts approximately 29 and a half days, and a 12-month lunar cycle is about 354 days. This is some 11 days shorter than the solar year, and the time which the Earth completes one rotation around the sun is 365 days. So without the adjustment, the lunar months would retrograde and fall back 11 days every solar year and not remain fixed in a particular season. Now that's a big problem in Judaism because it says all over the Torah when the holidays are supposed to be as far as season. So you're supposed to have Passover in the spring. And if you're falling back 11 days every year, in 15 years, you're in the winter. So you have a big problem there because then you're not doing something in the Torah. So you have to have these adjustments. And since the holidays are going to follow the lunar months, you have to make these adjustments. So to prevent this, where you'd have Passover in the winter, the Torah gives power to the court to adjust the calendar every few years to compensate for these missing days, and this is by adding a 13th month, a second Adar, in some years and making it a leap year. Now, there's some limitations on the court's authority to do this. So, what we were talking about in the Shvius year, right? So it says that we do not add a 13th month to declare a leap year, neither in the Shvius year nor in the year following Shvius. And you could see why that would be, right? Because we just had this case where people aren't farming, and now you're giving an extra month of non-farming activity in. You could see that would be an issue. Real quick, the Shvius, which means 7th, is the Shemitah year. It's the sabbatical year. And the Torah in Leviticus 25:1 commands that the shvius for the land must, that the land has to be left uncultivated, and the produce that grows by itself in this way is going to be hefker for everyone to take. So the reason the Sanhedrin does not declare the shvius a leap year is that we don't want to make this prohibition against cultivation even longer. And alternatively, it is because we do not want to extend the month to tithe-exempt status enjoyed by the shvius produce, for this deprives the Kohanim and the Levim of the tithes upon which they depend. So the reason the year after shvius should not be made a leap year is going to be explained in the next Gemara. But what's interesting to note about this sugya that Rabbi Yonatan is pointing out as the source for where do we know that the court, if it declares hefker by the court that it's going to be exempt from tithes, that the what's interesting to note about it is that if the Sanhedrin acted incorrectly in declaring shvius a leap year, their action is still effective. And we know that in the Bavli and Rosh Hashanah 25a, that the calendar is established as part of the Sanhedrin's ruling, even if it made a mistake. And the Gemara over there in Rosh Hashanah 25a is going to refer specifically to the Sanhedrin's power to affect the calendar by declaring Rosh Chodesh, and even by adjusting for the leap years. Now, if the Sanhedrin did not add this extra month to the year, the 13th month from the previous Rosh Hashanah would be Tishrei of the post Shvius year, and this is the case of what happens if you're waiting the year after Shvius, and then you're doing it. Then you're doing this extra month of Adar the year after Shvius, so that any produce that grew in that month, would have been subjected to tithes. But by declaring Shvius a leap year, or the year after, so that produce that grows during that month is going to be hefker and also exempt from tithes, just like all the other Shvius produce. Now, the problem is that you're making it for agriculture, to be done in a very difficult way. You're not allowed to plow fields and plant stuff. So it's an extra month of not planting. It's an extra month of not harvesting crops. It's an extra month of Kohanim not getting tithes. So that's a big thing. Now, just want to point out about the Rosh Cirillo's point on Rabbi Yonatan's proof. Rosh Cirillo explains that the Gemara is seeking to prove that the Beit Din has the authority to impose its rulings even when it creates the appearance of actively uprooting biblical law. And the proof actually emerges not only from the exemption of the extra month's produce from Meiser, but also from the permit to eat chametz, which would have been on Passover. Now, keep in mind that if they're making this adjustment and adding an extra month, then you're pushing off Passover a month. So you could say that, during this time, people would be eating chametz. So that's actually, they're not actually eating chametz, but it has this appearance of wrongdoing. So that the scope of the Beit Din's authority regarding the leap years, and with Meiser and chametz and everything else that's affected by the declaration of the leap year, you see that the law regarding the chametz is actually going to bolster this Gemara's proof, the sugya is going to deal with the issue of the exemption of Meiser, and the Gemara draws its proof specifically, says the Rosh Cirillo, from the fact that the Beit Din's declaration of a leap year in Shvius has the effect of exempting an extra month's produce from Meiser. So, the issue is that, well, it looks like by taking the produce and declaring it Hefker, and where it looks like it might be subject to tithing, and the scripture indicates that the Beit Din does have the power to forfeit the property of people. We established that yesterday, but maybe it doesn't mean that the Beit Din can actively change the title of property to turn it into something that's ownerless, and that they can actually remove it from the Beit Din, and maybe the Beit Din only has the authority to take away the owner's exclusive right to the property and open the door for anyone else to take it. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing that this exemption of the produce for this extra month, by adding in this extra adar, with the court pushing off Passover by a month, and how can that be? How can that be? There's a lot of questions with this, Hefker Beit Din. How can it be that they can take away the property? How can it be that they can push off Passover for a month? Now, the biblical law recognizes that the calendar, as being established in accordance with the Sanhedrin's rulings, whether they were correct or not, but the produce of the 13th month is exempt from tithes for the same reason. And once the court declares it a leap year, biblical law recognizes 13th month as part of the Shvius, so that its produce is automatically going to be Hefker and exempt from tithes. So, but the question is, what proof is there that the exemption stems from the court's power to declare property Hefker? In other words, they have the power to adjust the calendar, and by doing so, they can turn that produce into Hefker because it grew on that 13th month, because that's still part of the Shvius year. But what about that next leap of saying, okay, but how are you instituting where you're taking away property from this person without some sort of adjustment of calendar? I'm talking about just the case that we're talking about, where somebody comes and puts grain on top of somebody's leket. So how are you, what exactly is this mechanism that the court's power has to take property from Hefker? Because again, you're dealing with a case where, okay, the grain is put on top of the leket, and that's not questionable leket from the farmer. That's not questionable grain, leket that the farmer has mixed in there. That grain that gets mixed in with the leket, that's not leket. That's actually still the property of the farmer. But the law is that this actually now becomes the property of the poor person. So how do you have this taking away of property? That's the big question. That's the big question. What's this mechanism? And that's really the big mystery. So before we get into Rabbi Yonatan's discussion on this Baraisa, the Gemara wants to add a clarification of the Baraisa, and it says, thus far it is understandable why we do not declare Shvius in a leap year. But what is the reason that we do not declare the year following Shvius a leap year? So, on what we were just talking about, so you're the produce of the month added to the Shvius year is going to be tithe exempt. And it's understandable why we do not want to add a leap year in Shvius. We do not want to exempt more produce than necessary for tithes, and also we don't want to delay for farming for the next year. So, because again, the farmer is going to lose a month of farming in the year coming up. You're delaying it by a month. So the Gemara is going to answer, and it's going to say, Rabbi Avin said, so as not to prolong the Chodesh prohibition. So let's take a look at what the Marafulda says. It says that the new grain that grows each year is the Chodesh, literally new, and prohibited for consumption until the Omer offering is brought on the 16th of Nisan. We know that from Leviticus 23:14. And by adding a second Adar to the year, the arrival of the 16th of Nisan is delayed by a month. And thus, the Chodesh prohibition is prolonged. And doing so in the year following Shvius could have dire consequences, because planting and harvested are prohibited during Shvius. People must live off the stockpiles during the sixth year. In other words, you're supposed to stockpile all your food for 6 years and then live off of it. And by the spring of the 8th year, the stockpiles are basically exhausted, and prolonging that Chodesh prohibition is going to preclude consumption of the new produce at a time when the Yashan produce is no longer available. So, the fear is that you're going to set up for a famine by miscalculating it and adding, extra time for, when, you can have, Chodesh, and when, you can start farming for the next year. And, it can be very serious. It's a food security issue. So the Gemara is going to qualify the Bryce's ruling that Rabbi Yonatan was bringing up. And Rabbi Zera says in the name of Rabbi Abahu, that which you said, that we do not declare Shvius a leap year, pertain only before Rebbe permitted the importing of greens and grain from outside of the land of Israel into the land. So what's going on here? This is a historical thing, that Rebbe was allowing the import during the Shvius year to help to stave off starvation or famine or food security issues. Now, keep in mind that by rabbinic decree, that any soil from outside the land is tameh and transmits tuma through contact or being carried. And the reason for that is that they were worried that the soil contains human bone fragments from buried corpses. The reason, it says in Bavli and Shabbos 15b, Rashi says that the graves from outside Eretz Yisrael are not clearly marked. So inside of the vegetables, it's common for big clumps of earth to stick to the roots or the greens and the grains, and importing the produce into the land of Israel would in fact cause a spread of tuma into the land. So to prevent that, the sages prohibited the importation of greens and grain into the land. But when this restriction was in effect, there was always a danger of food shortages in the Shvius year in Eretz Yisrael. So that's the reason why that the Sanhedrin would not prolong Shvius by declaring it a leap year, because you're going to exacerbate this, and you're also limited on food imports. And the Gemara continues, and he says that but once Rebbe permitted the importation of greens and grains from outside the land into Israel, the Shvius year is the same as other years of the 7-year cycle, and it too may be declared a leap year. Rabbi Kanievsky in his Burim Shiurim says that about this sugya, says that there are severe food shortages during Shvius in his day, and that caused Rebbe to end the restriction against imports. Keep in mind that it was still under Roman rule and Roman control, and even while Rebbe had good relationships with the Roman Empire, they still made things hard to do and bureaucratic and difficult, and the food production had decreased, so that's why Rebbe instituted it. Now, any food shortage, says the Vilna Gaon, caused by prolonging the prohibition on cultivation for another month is going to be offset by the importation of food from outside the land. That's why you can adjust that once you have the lifting of this. So the Rosh Cirillo is going to say that although the Gemara mentions only the Shvius year, the reason that there's a leniency applies to the post-Shvius year as well. And it is explained that the reason we do not add a month to the year after Shvius is because we do not want to prolong the Chodesh prohibition at a time when there's no, Yashan produce, no old produce available inside the land. But once we allow the importation of foreign grain, this concern goes away as well. So some of the commentators understand that the Gemara means that from the time that Rebbe permitted imports, the Shvius year and the following year are no different from other years in the cycle, and that you can adjust it to have a leap year in there. So the Brisa is going to continue, and it's going to introduce another qualification to the ruling, and the Brisa reads like this. It says, "We do not add a leap year neither in the Shvius year nor in the year following Shvius, rather only in the other years of the 7-year cycle. But if the Sanhedrin did make either these years a leap year, their declaration is effective and the year is established as a leap year." And Rabbi Manna said, "That which you said that we do not declare the year after the leap year pertain only originally when the years were in their natural order, such that the winter grain ripened in a timely fashion and was fit for consumption by the time of the Omer being offered. But now when the years," says Rabbi Manna, "are not in their natural order, and the new crop does not ripen until in the spring, the year following Shvius is the same as other years of the 7-year cycle, and it too may be declared a leap year." So, Pnei Moshe points out that since the new crop will, in any event, not be available for consumption until later in the spring, adding a second Adar and extending the Chodesh prohibition for another month is not any consequence. The Rosh Cirillo is going to explain Rabbi Manna's statement as follows. He's going to explain it as pertaining to the Shvius itself, as well as the year after Shvius. And he's saying that about the statement that Rabbi Manna is saying, that which you said that we do not make Shvius a leap year pertains only now when the years are not as they should be, but originally when the years were as they should be, Shvius was the same as the other years of the 7-year cycle. So what the Rosh Cirillo is saying about this and how he's reading is, he's saying that according to this reading, Rabbi Manna refers to the fact that the Torah addresses the question of how the people in Eretz Yisrael will survive without cultivating the land in the Shvius year. And God responds with a promise that he will bestow his blessing upon them in the year before Shvius, so that its crop will be sufficiently abundant to sustain the people until the post-Shvius harvest. We know that in Leviticus 25:20. Rabbi Manna states that the restriction against declaring a leap year in either Shvius or the next year applies only nowadays when the years are not as they should be. In other words, the people generally do not observe Shvius properly, so they do not merit God's blessing in the pre-Shvius year. So in other words, what Rabbi Manna is pointing out, says Rosh Cirillo, is that the level of the people has gone down. And because the level of the people has gone down in observance, they're getting less divine providence. And so they're not getting this buffer crop that the Torah promises in the 6th year because they're not meriting it. And because of that, you're seeing this come up. So it says, Rosh Cirillo says that they do not merit God's blessing in the pre-Shvius year, according to Rabbi Manna, but in the earlier times when the years were as they should be, meaning that the people observed Shvius properly, so God actually bestowed his blessing upon them, there is nothing wrong with declaring a leap year in the Shvius or in the next year, since the abundant pre-Shvius crop precluded any possibility of a food shortage in either of these 2 years, either the Shvius year or the year following the Shvius. So that's a really amazing insight. So you have one case over here saying that, there's these food shortages and Rebbe lifted the importation. And Rabbi Manna is not disagreeing with any of this. He's only pointing out that, hey, you're supposed to be getting this blessing in the 6th year. Unless you say, hey, maybe there's no blessing in the 6th year, Rabbi Manna is pointing out that, hey, this is not happening because the people are not following. And because the people are not following the Shvius properly, there's all sorts of cheating in it, and there's Shvius merchants and people selling Shvius produce to make profit on it, that because the people aren't really observing properly, that this 6th year blessing is not happening because the people don't warrant it, and that's what's creating these food shortages, and that's why there's no adjustment for the extra Adar in these 2 months. And yes, okay, that's fine that Rebbe fixed it by allowing imports, so you don't need that. But the original point of why the food scarcity was happening on Shvius, that's what Rabbi Manna is pointing out. Rabbi Manna is pointing out that he's pointing out that the reason why it seems like it's defying what the Torah says it should happen. Rabbi Kanievsky says that from his biurim, he says that since the new crop will in any event not be available for consumption until later this spring, adding a second Adar and extending the Chodesh prohibition for another month is not of any consequence. So, when things are in the natural order and working the way the Torah says, and the Jews are following what the Torah says, there's no big deal because you have so much extra crop coming from the 6th year that adding the extra month doesn't matter because you have this extra blessing. But when you are not following it, then you have a big problem because you're not going to have enough for the 7th year and then also the 8th year, because don't forget, you can't work the land on the 7th year. So your stockpiles are very low. So there's going to be a related Baraisa, and here's what it says. It says, it was taught in a Baraisa, the court of Rabban Gamliel's house declared a leap year immediately following Shvius. So how can that be? So here's the note by the Mara Fulda. It says that, by the Rosh Cirillo, it says that this Gemara apparently cites the Baraisa to support Rabbi Manna's statement that nowadays, when the crops do not ripen until later in the spring, we may make the post-Shvius year a leap year. So, one way to look at it is that Rabban Gamliel's court made this declaration of a leap year immediately after the Shvius had ended, and in Tishrei of the post-Shvius year, This is this is a matter of note because only in the cases of emergency would a leap year be declared before the month of Adar. So I want to look at another explanation for this to help us understand it. In Bavli Sanhedrin 12a, it also talks about Rabban Gamliel's court as disputing the Tana of the previous Baraisa, who ruled that we do not make the year a Shvius, after Shvius, a leap year, but Rabban Gamliel's court permits it. And the Bavli explains that this dispute hinges on whether it is permissible to import produce to Eretz Yisrael. Now, Rabban Gamliel's court permitted it so that they had no problems with declaring a leap year immediately after the Shvius. But the Yerushalmi agrees that once the importation of the produce became permissible, the Sanhedrin was allowed to declare the leap year following a Shvius, and the Yerushalmi stated that the importation was permitted, only in the days of Rebbe, who was actually a descendant of Rabban Gamliel. So, according to the Bavli, that this lifting actually occurred earlier, and in the Yerushalmi, it's pointing out that this occurred later. So, that's a difference in the timeline between the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and that happens sometimes. That happens a lot in Tanis, by the way. So we were talking about this explanation of these two Baraisas and getting an understanding of what's happening about the agriculture in Eretz Yisrael at this time. And the Gemara is going to get back to this original point. And, from the Baraisa's ruling that the court declared Shvius a leap year, that their declaration is effective, and that this extra month, this produce from the extra month that's going to be growing in the field is going to be Hefker, and that's going to be exempt from tithes. And Rabbi Yonatan had inferred that the produce declared Hefker by the court is going to be exempt from tithes, but the Gemara is going to challenge that. So Rabbi Avin says, if your proof from this ruling that you cannot infer anything, you cannot infer anything from it. In other words, in the case that the produce is not rendered Hefker by the court, but by the Torah, which empowers the court to declare leap years when necessary, even for Shvius, so that really what Rabbi Avin is pointing out, he's trying to figure out, and Rabbi Yonatan as well, is the source of this Hefker. And so, one way that they may be declaring it Hefker is by using the power to adjust the calendar to do it. So Rabbi Avin is actually going to point out a source in the Torah for this, where the power to do this is actually Doraita. We know that in Devarim, chapter 16, Pasuk 1, it says the following. It says, guard the month of ripening, in other words, Nisan, and this is going to be explained as the directive to the court to, as the Sugya says now, to guard it, the ripening spring season, so that it falls during the moon's renewal in the month of Nisan. So, just a quick note here by the Pnei Moshe and Marafulda. So, when necessary, they insert an extra month into the year to adjust the cycle of the lunar months to the solar year, so that the spring equinox is going to fall during the first 14 days of the lunar month of Nisan. So in the verse, the Torah authorizes the court to declare the leap years when necessary, and this authority pertains even in Shvius. Now, the rabbis discourage making the leap year a Shvius, but if the court violates the directive, it is still applied with biblical law, because they have the power of Doraita to do it. So the exemption of the extra month's produce from tithes is based on the Torah's recognition of this month as part of Shvius and not the court's power to declare property Hefker. We therefore cannot infer from here that the court's declaration of Hefker renders produce exempt from tithes. So really what Rabbi Avin's pointing out is he's pointing out that this taking of property from the farmer who places the crop on top of the Leket, okay, that's not coming from that power. Don't say that power to remove that property is coming from the power to adjust the calendar, because the power to adjust the calendar is talking about something else. That's the point of Rabbi Avin. So then, what is going to be the source of this? In other words, Rabbi Avin's pointing out that Rabbi Yonatan, all he did was prove that, you adjust the month and now it's Hefker, right? Because the court's empowered to do it by the Torah. And if you're making the month of, the month longer or the year longer, all you did was take this crop that grows here and make it Hefker because it now falls within this period of time. You harvest it and take it in this period of time. Fine. That's the source of Hefker, says Rabbi Avin. But that's not the same as taking away somebody's produce that was already harvested and put on top of the Hefker. So he's rejecting this proof, and the Gemara now is going to get into this Mishnah and is going to look at the Tanaic source for this principle that produce declared Hefker by the court is going to be exempt from tithes. So we know that this mechanism for what's happening is not being done by the change of the calendar. So what is happening? So the Gemara says, rather, which Tanaic teaching states this principle? It is this Mishnah. If there is a grain pile from under which the Leket had not been gathered, says the Gemara about the Mishnah, says that all the ears that touch the ground belong to the poor. Now, just as a note from the Pnei Moshe, although not all these ears are actual Leket, the rabbis penalized the landowner for having piled his grain over the Leket of the poor. So we see that there's a taking, and we're seeing that they're actually saying the source of this taking by the Tanaim is actually going to be in this Mishnah here in Peah, that this is the source for it. So Rabbi Manna says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish that this Mishnah, which awards all the ears touching the ground to the poor and indicates that these ears are exempt from tithing, reflects the view of Beit Shammai. So we talked about this yesterday. Beit Shammai said that the produce declared Hefker just for the poor is Hefker and exempt from tithes. And according to Beit Shammai, the produce that the owner leaves for the poor in compliance with the rabbinic penalty is exempt from tithes, even though it is not actual Leket, since he has, in effect, left it Hefker and free for acquisition by any poor person. So, according to Beit Shammai, this is actually the mechanism of what's happening to transfer the property from this farmer to the poor people. So let me explain it again. According to Beit Shammai, when that farmer puts it on top of the Hefker, on top of the Leket, the produce that the owner leaves for the poor with this rabbinic penalty is going to be exempt from tithes because, according to Beit Shammai, he left it Hefker and free for acquisition for any poor. And because we know that Hefker is free from tithes, that's the mechanism of how this happens according to Beit Shammai. Now, we have to have Beit Hillel's opinion. So here's what the Gemara says, but according to Beit Hillel, who says that produce declared Hefker just for the poor is not Hefker, the poor would be required to first tithe the extra stalks and only then eat them. So basically, it's clear from the Mishnah that these extra ears are exempt from tithes, no less than actual leket. So it looks like this Mishnah follows Beit Shammai, because the Mishnah is saying that he doesn't need to tithe them. So what's going on here? So here's what the Gemara says. It says, and Rabbi Yasa said to Rabbi Manna, we have heard a tradition from our teachers that the grain touching the ground is exempt from tithes according to all, including Beit Hillel, on account of the rabbinically imposed penalty. So what's going on here? So Pnei Moshe says that although Beit Hillel holds that ordinarily something declared Hefker specifically for the poor is not Hefker, they all agree, there's no dispute at all, that here the grain touching the ground is Hefker, for that which is declared Hefker by the court is Hefker in any event. And we see from this interpretation as cited by Rabbi Yasa that the produce declared Hefker by the court is going to be exempt from tithes. There's no tithes on it. So this is going to be, a special tradition that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have about this law that's talked about here in the Mishnah. It looks like, wait a second, this is following Beit Shammai. How can that be? We know that that's probably not the Halacha. So how can it be? But the Gemara is pointing out that actually there's no dispute, and they both have this tradition that Beit Hillel would say the same thing in this case. And again, let me read the case by Beit Hillel again. Rabbi Yasa said to Rabbi Manna, we have heard a tradition from our teachers. So this is a tradition that, the Matzorah that they have, that the grain touching the ground is exempt from tithes according to all, including Beit Hillel, on account of the rabbinically imposed penalty. So that, this is, Hefker, and it's exempt from tithes. So, Beit Hillel holds that this is a special type of Hefker, and that when the grain is touching the ground, they're agreeing that this is declared Hefker by the court, and that's how this is happening. An individual cannot make something Hefker for the poor, but the court can, and that's the tradition that they both have. So there's no maloket, and no, you're not reading this Mishnah like Beit Shammai. They actually both are saying the same thing. There's no dispute. So that really the point of this is that, the person cannot make Hefker for the poor. There's no such thing. But what they both agree on is that the court can make Hefker for the poor, but person cannot. So the Mishnah was talking before about the wind that scatters the owner's sheaves over the area of the field from which the Leket had not yet been collected. And the Mishnah says that we go and we estimate the Leket the field would be expected to yield, and he gives that amount to the poor. And you can imagine that maybe they didn't tie up the sheaves yet before they bundle them and pile them up onto the bigger area, and a very big wind blows, and it's just blows all this harvest all over, and now you have something that halakhically belongs to the poor. It's leket, not picked up by the poor yet, and you have something that halakhically belongs to the farmer. How do you fix this? So the Gemara reads, it says, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, he gives to the poor the amount that normally falls. And the Gemara defines the amount that normally falls and says, Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the amount of leket that normally falls from a harvest is 4 kabin per core. Now, let me explain that. I'm going to look at the Pnei Moshe for some help here. So every core of the crop, when cut, produces an average of 4 kavin, and a kav is going to be the singular of it, so 4 kavin of leket ears. Now, a kav is a measure of volume equal to 4 lugin, and a log is the volume of 6 average chicken eggs. So 1 kav is equal to 24 egg volumes, and 4 kavin is equal to 96 egg volumes. So a core is a measure equal to 36 seah, each of which equals 6 kavin, so that there's 180 kavin in a core, meaning that 4 kavin are 1/45th of a core. So saying that, on average, 4 kavin of leket fall per core of the harvest means that the ratio of leket to the harvest is 1/145. Okay? And this is the amount that the landowner whose sheaves are scattered over the uncollected leket must give to the poor, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. You see here how amazing the sages are, is that they went out and they calculated this for an area per for 4 kavin, and it comes out to be that in the case where this blows away and it all gets mixed up and they have to pick it out and they have to take out the leket again and they have to take out their own ownership, that it's going to come out mathematically that the leket comes out to 1/45, 1 1/45. So 1/45, and that's the amount that the landowner gives over for sheaves, and the rest is his. And that's the amount that normally falls for leket. The Gemara is going to try to clarify that further, and it says that Rabbi Zera inquired before Rabbi Abahu, does this mean 4 kavin per core of harvested produce, or 4 kavin per bet core of land? That's a good question. In other words, he's saying that, are you talking about that you harvested 4 kavin, and that's what you've actually taken out? Or are you measuring by the size of the land? So the note here says like this. Says that a bet core is the area of land in which a core of barley seed is planted, and this equals to 75,000 square amos. So the Rashi in Baba Metzia 105b, he's pointing that out. And Rabbi Zera effectively here is asking whether Rabbi Yochanan meant that on average of the 4 kavin of leket falling for each core of produce that's harvested, in other words, 1/145th of the crop, or is the average of the 4 kavin of leket from where a core of seed was sown. Now, we had talked about this before, about sowing the seed, where the seeds are normally sold in a packaging that's going to fit a certain size piece of land. So, according to the Vilna Gaon here, he's pointing out that each core of seed generally yields a crop of 7.5 core of grain, and therefore 4 kavin of leket per bet core would set an average leket fall at 4 kavin per 7.5 core of crop, which is going to be 1 in 337.5. So basically each core of seed would yield 45 core of grain. So 4 kavin of leket per bet core would set the average leket fall at 4 kavin per 45 core of the crop, which is 1 over 2,025. So that's a big question. And Rabbi Abahu replied, and he said to Rabbi Zera, it actually means 4 kavin per bet core of land. So we have a clarification. By the way, the Bavli reaches the same conclusion, and that is talking about 4 size of land. In other words, it's how much seed can be sown in the size of land. It's not based on the harvest, it's based on how much can be sown. So the Gemara is going to challenge the assertion that the amount that normally falls refers to what ordinary falls as leket during the harvest, because that's still a question. So we learned in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yudah says, what kind of limit is a heap? And the Gemara reads, rather, if the yield contains the amount that normally falls, the sharecropper is obligated to continue to care for the field. And Rabbi Abahu said, the amount that normally falls means the amount of grain that falls into the field when one scatters the seed to sow it. And there, he says that the definition of the amount that normally falls, yet here, says the Sugya, with respect to our Mishnah, he says that this other definition. So, in other words, the question here is, does the Mishnah use the same term in reference for 2 different things? So, basically, you have another Mishnah that's talking about when produce falls for a sharecropper, and the question is, basically saying that over there and over here is the amount going to be the same when you sow it? And actually, the Gemara leaves it unanswered. It doesn't answer it. So the Sidei Yeshua, based on the Rambam's commentary in this Mishnah, says that the lack of the response indicates that Rabbi Abahu's interpretation of this Mishnah was refuted, and the term, the amount that normally falls, in our Mishnah must also be understood as referring to the amount of seed required to sow the field. And the Mareh Panim interprets the lack of response not as a concession to the challenge, but as a sign of disregard for it. So, yes, while, says the Mareh Panim, while both Mishnahs use the same expression, the amount that normally falls, each must be understood in the context in which it is used. So in Baba Metzia, where the term comes to define what is called a sufficient yield to require a sharecropper to honor his contract, it refers to the amount that could be used to sow the field, and such a yield is worth working for, as it will facilitate sowing the field in the next season. But in our Mishnah, it comes to define how much leket we presume lies under the owner's wind-scattered grain, and it surely refers to the amount of leket that normally falls during the harvest. So, since it's obvious, according to the Mareh Panim, that that's what it's talking about, the Gemara deems the challenge unworthy of a response and doesn't reply. And indeed, this challenge is not cited at all in the Bavli and Baba Metzia. It doesn't even bring it up. I just want to point out the Vilna Gaon's approach on this. And the Vilna Gaon points out that for this Gemara, in his view, the Gemara does not cite Rabbi Abahu's explanation of the other Mishnah as a challenge to his explanation of this Mishnah. Rather, it's meant to demonstrate that the identical phrase has a different meaning in the 2 Mishnahs. And that's the point of Rabbi Abahu's words. So according to Vilna Gaon, he's holding like what the Mareh Panim is saying, which is that the same phrase is being used here and there, but it actually means 2 different things. So that's the approach by the Vilna Gaon. Anyway, have a great day, and tomorrow we're going to learn more about reaping. Have a great day.